Alrighty. Okay, so let's go ahead, log in. Oh, there we go. Alright, so today is going to be the last day of this coding back course. Um, because, well, we are almost done with all of the questions. And I think so far we have accomplished a lot of the goals that we intended to. So I feel like it is it's about time to wrap up this course, and we will actually be moving on to our next course. Um, so it will kind of be continuing along this line of Python. So we're obviously going to stick to Python, but we're thinking of switching to a more advanced sort of um, programming. Because as of now, we're only writing, some fairly short bits of code, right? There's nothing too hard here. It's just 5-10 lines ish. But what we're going to be doing in the next course is writing probably around 100 to 200 line codes worth of programs in order to accomplish some sort of task. Now, this task is going to be something, like a game or something like that. If you've never heard of this, it's called Pong. This could be one of the things, but Pong is one of the many basic games that you can program in Python. And it teaches you a lot about um, how it works, kind of. So, and what you can actually create. So this is what Pong kind of looks like. So you can see there's all of this, like all these kind of formats where essentially what's happening is there's a paddle here, there's a paddle here, and the ball just kind of moves across the line, and you just hit the ball over and you lose if the ball goes past your side. So, the rules are pretty simple. You could probably learn it pretty fast if you wanted to go ahead and just try it out online. Feel free to do so yourself. But again, this is going to be kind of a more project-based class moving forward rather than teaching kind of the basic techniques, because I feel like we're at that point where we've almost mastered kind of the basic logic, string, and list techniques that CodingBat aims to teach us here. Now Python is a little more simple in that these are the only ones that we're going to be kind of examining over here. Obviously, if you hop in over Java, there's a lot more stuff over here, but we're not going to have to worry about this since that's Java. This is Python. Um, so as we can see, we finished, I think we've done 5 or 6 of these. Over here we finished every single problem, and in lists I believe we have one problem left to do here. And this is going to be called centered average. So we're just going to do, the regular routine. We're going to go ahead, read the instructions over here, go over these test cases over here, and once you've gone over both of these, go ahead and try and make your own pseudocode. I guess I'll see you in a couple minutes when you've done that. Alrighty, so now that hopefully you've gone over kind of the basic pseudocode, we can run over this here. So return the centered average of an array of integers. So obviously there's these quotations over centered because, you know, that's not the normal way we just say average, so there's probably something special about this. Well, it says which we'll say is the mean average of the values except ignoring the largest and smallest values in the array. If there are multiple copies of the smallest value, ignore just one copy, and likewise for the largest value. Use integer division to produce the final average. You may assume that the array is length of 3 or more, right? So what we can see over here is that we have these cases that's given to us, and it seems that the array is already in a list over here. So we're given an array of integers. Most likely its name is num, so I'm just gonna go ahead, define centered average nums, like that. And when we go ahead, we do this, we can see, alright, well, how can we pull out the smallest and largest numbers in this? Well, thankfully, there's Google for this, if you don't know this, right? Because it's gonna be hard, you know? If you don't know this method, then what you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to loop through this entire thing, going, which one is the smallest, right? I'm gonna have to compare every single one of the numbers, and then I'm gonna have to do it again, and go through it, and get all the biggest numbers. Well, thankfully, we're not that step yet, so we're just going to go ahead and get the pseudocode. So, we want to find the smallest number, and find the biggest number. And then, we want to return the average of nums minus the smallest number minus the biggest number. And this is going to be our final kind of statement over here. You know, not too long, nothing too hard about this one, but we just need to understand, well, how do we find the smallest and biggest number? Right? Well, I think this pseudocode is fairly simple. There's nothing much to it, so I think we can just go ahead and move on. But if we were to try and find the smallest number, there is a method known as min. And if we use that on this, we can get the smallest number. Now, what happens if you don't know how to do this? You see, it's always important to know what exactly is happening behind the scenes, right? Because if you don't know what's happening behind the scenes, you might not be able to use the function properly, right? What these functions serve to do is not to leave a hole in your knowledge, right? Not being able to know how to find the minimum, but rather to just simplify it. Because instead of having to write a minimum function, which is pretty darn common when you do these types of problems, instead it just saves that time for you. They wrote this piece of code for you, and you just have to call it, right? Instead of having to rewrite all of it. But it's important to still know how exactly this works. So I'm just going to go ahead and write the code bit for you. So when we loop through this, we're going to be trying to find the smallest number. And that means that we have to keep track of which one is the smallest number at the time. So we write small is equal to 1 billion. Or probably a little more than a billion. But essentially, we go very, very big, right? I suggest you don't go too big in the case that your code doesn't go well and errors happen. So what is going to happen here is we're going to say, so small is equal to, what is that, 100,000, right? And we go through for I in range nums. Sorry. But we need to think over here. Well, is there really a point in putting range here? No, there isn't. Because we're just going through all of them. We don't care about the indexes. We just want to go through every single one of them. So I'll give you a second to think about what goes inside this for loop. So what goes inside this for loop is we are going to be comparing small to every single other number. So if small is less than I, or greater than I, small gets replaced by I. And in the very end, small will be the smallest number there, right? So essentially, this is how the minimum method works. You know, it's just 3 lines. It's not really that hard to kind of remember anything, but rather it serves as something to just remind us, or to just save us kind of some time, you know? So now that we have this, we know what's happening over here. We can do the exact same thing with the biggest number. So we'll write another variable. We'll say it's biggest. And biggest is equal to max nums. Again, we're going to make sure we know exactly what's happening here. Well, biggest is going to equal to 0, right? Because we think 0 is going to be the smallest possible number in this set here. Unfortunately, that's not entirely true, as we see that there are in fact negative numbers over here. So instead, we're just going to go ahead and do negative 100,000, right? It's important to go through all your cases to know kind of the practicality of the method that you're using. And what we can do is we can literally just copy and paste this. We can copy this over here, we can paste it into here, and we just have to make sure that we change these variable names so that they match. And once they match, it's important to make sure you flip this sign over here, because we have a different meaning here. So if big is less than I, meaning that I is bigger than big, then I becomes the biggest number. And in the end, big will return the biggest number, essentially giving us max. But then there's one more thing, right? Because Python programming in general is all about simplification. We can actually go ahead and simplify both of these functions. But we're not going to simplify both of them. We're just going to do this one for time's sake, right? Because these two are basically the same thing. Well, there is a way to put this if statement into one line, right? And we can say big is equal to I if big is less than 1. And that is essentially that line, those 2 lines put into one line. Is there a use for this? Not really. Will people tell you to use this? Yes, they will. But then again, the code is there for you to understand, not for them to go ahead and understand it. Obviously, if you know the restrictions on this are like, oh, you can only go 5 lines and you have 6 lines and you have this simplification that you can make, go ahead and do it. But I highly don't recommend you to do this, because it can often confuse the code in your mind, as separating it out into lines will make it easier for your brain to process. So now that we have these 2 functions, we only need these 2 lines over here, so I'm just going to go ahead, delete everything else. And we are on to the final part of this, finding the average. Well, we could just return this in the return statement, but I'm going to choose to store it in a variable. Right? We have to think here, well, how can we find the average here? Well, there's another function called sum. Unfortunately, there's no average list for us, although that would certainly be very nice, right? But what's going to happen here is what we're going to do is we're going to take the sum of the numbers minus smallest minus biggest, right? Divided by the length of nums minus 2. And parentheses is very important here because if we don't put the parentheses, then that is, essentially going to be the only divisor, not this minus 2 here. So the average is going to look very, very weird to us. And this is essentially what it's going to look like. Now that we've stored in this variable, we can just go ahead and return average. But oftentimes, we can just go ahead and delete that average and just return this outright. And we can go ahead, we're going to run the test cases, and we see we have an invalid syntax. Now, syntax error is probably one of the friendliest errors because it's pretty easy to spot out. We can see we have 1 parentheses opening, 2 parentheses opening, 3, 4, but we only have 1, 2, 3 closed. And there's another useful feature of many IDEs, or platforms where you program, that can help you identify these errors. Because if you go ahead and you hover over this parentheses, you'll notice that this one gets highlighted. If you hover over this one, that one gets highlighted. So it highlights over the parentheses that the program thinks it belongs to. So if we go ahead, we hover over this one over here, you'll notice that there is no parentheses on this other side. So we need to make sure we put that here. And when we come back here, you'll notice that it will hover over right here. So we run it, we see, oh no, we got a lot wrong here. Well, turns out we got this part right over here, but we didn't get the top part right. And the reason for that is because we didn't put more parentheses. And when we run all the parentheses together, you can see that we get all of the cases right. So I want you to take, maybe 4 or 5 minutes to go over our thinking process that just occurred and make sure you understand what's going on, because this can often be the most confusing part. When you have an error, many people think that, oh no, I thought I did everything right, but it turns out I didn't. So instead what's going to happen is we got to make sure we take these systematical steps in order to solve this problem, because many times these problems are pretty simple, right? It's just a little hidden. So I guess I'll give you 4 or 5 minutes and then see you then. Alright, so hopefully you were able to go ahead, really understand what is happening here. So the plan moving forward is that we are going to go ahead and, just kind of briefly take a look at all the concepts here, right? As this is going to be the last class covering CodingBat, we are going to be taking a break for the next couple of weeks as it is winter break, and as soon as school starts back up, this will start back up, and I hope you guys will tune back in for the new course. But for now, we can just kind of look at the different topics here. So, as said before, there are three main topics here: string, list, and logic. So, we can go ahead, we can look at logic 2. So, you can click into these ones if you want on your own, but the main thing about logic was really figuring out how exactly does this work, right? These are kind of brain games that you had to figure out yourself before you could go ahead and program it, and when you did figure it out, it wasn't all that hard, right? That is really the essence of it. There's nothing much more than that. It taught us some basic things, some basic syntax, how to debug logic errors mainly, because before this we would only do syntax errors. So that's it for logic. Strings. Well, strings was important because, well, it taught us about strings, Strings is going to be one of the most versatile types in Python. You're going to use it everywhere to store values, store names, to take inputs, to return, to print. All that stuff is strings, right? Strings is very important. Learning how to properly manipulate them, which was the goal of this section of CodingBat, is essential to learning how to program in Python. And finally is going to be list. List is also going to be one of the most versatile kind of types in Python. It is not all that complicated from the top. It's just a list of things, right? But it can do so many things, right? And this CodingBat section only touches the very tip of the iceberg. Later on, hopefully in your programming career, you will meet more, computer intensive, I guess, list calculations, where we won't be dealing with lists with 10 numbers, 20 numbers, but rather, 100,000, million, 10 million numbers at once. And then you will realize just how wonderful it is to have programming around. Because, holy moly, I would not want to do all of that myself, right? So, yeah, this is kind of, the main goal of CodingBat, to get you familiar with the three main topics of Python programming. There's obviously many, many more topics, but these are pretty basic ones that you really need to get down in order to get started on Python programming. So if you do not have any questions, I hope you guys... Oh, so it says nums is not defined in the centered average. Okay, so go back here. So it's important when you go ahead and you do this type of programming that you know what all of this means. Okay. If you don't know what I mean by that, well, every single piece of code has something special in here that is going to be found in every single other parts of code. So this can be split up into the method header and the body, two things. This method header, you're going to want to have define the name and all the parameters. So, CodingBet isn't always consistent with what it names this header over here. I tend to choose ones that I can remember easily. Typically, this relates to whatever whatever one that you want to kind of relate to. So, say they were to name it A, and I were to run this code. Well, it says nums is not defined, right? Because, well, we need to switch this to A and not nums, because the list that it's giving us is now named A. But if we were to name it nums in this parameter, the list that is going into here is going to be called nums, and so this error goes away and it runs correctly. Hopefully this answered your question. So yeah, if you don't have any other questions, I guess I'll see you around after the holidays. I hope you guys have a wonderful winter break. If you do have questions, feel free to stick around and ask them. So yeah, I guess see you guys next session. Alrighty, it looks like no one has any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and end the stream here. Thank you everyone for watching, and I hope you guys all tune in to the next session. Thank you.